Thank you very much for coming. My name is Matthew Revell. I work as a developer advocate at a company called Couchbase. And I'm going to talk a bit about how I and other people have done things to build awareness and adoption of mostly open source projects amongst developers. And these are kind of some developer advocate type things. But actually, the real message of this is about how to retain your credibility and not to become a marketing guy or a sales guy. And really, the core of developer advocacy, technical evangelism, whatever you want to call it, is about dealing with some of the most cynical people on the planet whilst retaining your credibility and doing it in a way that allows you to sleep at night. So, pizza. You can eat for free almost any night of the week in London. All you need is a tolerance for pizza and a meetup.com account. Depending on where you are, you might also need to be able to deal with people who are trying to convince you that really, really strong American IPAs are the only beers to drink as well. But offices, co-working spaces, hack spaces, whatever, wherever they are, there are meetups happening in cities around the world every night of the week. And developers are getting together to spontaneously share things that have worked for them. And if you want to get the attention of those developers for your API, your open source project, whatever it is, then you're going to need a lot more than just better pizza toppings. So why free pizza? Well, ever since Charles Babbage went to the University of Turin and gave a seminar on the difference engine, developers and other people in tech have been sharing ideas through meetups or seminars or whatever. It's a natural coming together of people sharing amongst their peers the things that have worked for them. And it works because people only share the things that actually did a good job for them. You can generally trust someone if they're speaking at a meetup because they're giving up their spare time to show you something that worked for them. The flip side, of course, is that a lot of really good tools can go unnoticed. And if it's something you're working on in your spare time as a side project, then that's a shame. But if you're a venture capital funded startup and your thing goes unnoticed, then you're all out of a job. Building things is hard. You've built your API, your library, your database system, whatever it is. And you might think the hard work's over. But unless you built it for some personal satisfaction at making that thing, then actually if no one knows about it, then of course it's a waste of time. So, you want to build awareness. You want people to know your thing exists at the very least. And that's quite hard. But then once they know it exists, you want them to try it out and hopefully use it in some real life scenario. So you need people to get excited about it, to understand it, and to be able to work with it enough to put it into production. And then if you want all of this to kind of sustain itself a bit more and to enable you to go back to writing code or to build a business or whatever it is, then you need to build a community around that tool, that API, whatever it is, that enables you to kind of amplify your message through other people. So that you're not the only person talking about this tool that you've built. And that, in effect, is DevRel. That's developer relations, developer advocacy. And rather than leave that to chance, a lot of companies are now hiring dedicated developer relations teams. People whose job it is to speak at conferences, write blog posts, and to be the voice of the developer within that company and the voice of that company or project within the developer community. And this talk is probably biased towards that full-time role, but actually I think the whole thing is applicable to anyone who just wants to get more awareness for the thing that they've built. It's worth noting as well that this isn't B2D marketing or business to developer marketing. This isn't the creeping in to the developer world of the marketing team. So B2D marketing is a term that's kind of gained a lot more traction in the past year or so. And it's this idea that, you know, you've got B2B marketing for business to business, B2C for business to consumer, and now, you know, marketing people are trying to tell their stories to developers as well. And I almost think that sometimes traditional marketing within the tech world is like a set of puzzles being set for developers, because I have a lot of respect for marketing people and so on, but, you know, unless you have a deep understanding of the tech you're dealing with, sometimes you can make mistakes that make you look silly, make your company look silly. And I know that all the developers I am friends with, if they see a benchmark published for a tool that interests them, the first thing they do is try and replicate the terms of the benchmark. And because they want to test the validity of the methodology, they want to try and find somewhere that there's not a lie, but something where it's maybe biased and not fair. And, you know, this is all based around the fact that marketing software, marketing tools to developers is not like marketing laundry detergent. You can't go out and say, we've got a new improved algorithm with extra big data, impressive artists in it, you know, like you see on face cream adverts with, or things like, I don't know, some yogurt that you drink that has some special formula in it that's going to make you into a super person. You know, we can't blind developers with science, because they're like I say, the most cynical people on earth a lot of the time, and they will test things. They will test what you tell them. So, what is developer advocacy? Well, to me it's a three-part mission. Now it's still a pretty new role, but it's, like I say, it's really the thing that we as developers have been doing all this time anyway. We've all been writing blog posts about things that work for us, or how to get around something that didn't quite work with a particular tool. We've all gone and given, or many of us have given meetup talks or listened to meetup talks because it was something we were interested in. So developer advocacy and generally promoting your project is kind of the codification, the professionalization of that thing that we all do anyway. And like I said, see it as a three-part mission. The first is show up. You know, be present places, go to conferences, go to meetups, be in the Stack Overflow threads about your tool online, you know, answer the questions, just be there. And it's crazy how important it is, but just showing up and being present and wearing the t-shirt and being a nice person and maybe buying some coffees really goes a long way, or beers, or whatever you want to buy. So that's the first part, just the table stakes is just showing up. Then easing the on-ramp. Make it possible, once people have got an awareness of your product, make it possible for them to try it out in the least difficult way, you know, with the least amount of friction. So you will write blog posts that show how to get started quickly with your tool using Node.js, for example. Or you will do a video, or you'll do a conference talk, or you will go back to the engineering team and say, look, I was talking to some developers and they tried this, and it would be much easier if it worked this other way. You know, so it's basically, once people know about the product, then making it easy for them to get started with it. And then the last part is building and sustaining community. So it's about knowing who is out there, what they want to get from being part of this community and using this tool, and what they can deliver as well. So it's doing things like creating MVP programs or expert programs. It's about buying people beers, sending them swag, making sure they feel valued and as though they are part of something greater than themselves. But this talk isn't really so much about that three-part mission as much as getting ready for it. In 45 minutes, it's not really possible to cover the entirety of the developer advocacy world. So one thing that I really wanted to focus on was the steps you need to take to understand how to get started. Whether it's for your own project as a sideline, or it's because you're taking on a job as a developer advocate. So the first thing you need to do is look at yourself and work out where you are and where you want to be. So, like I just said, where you are, where you want to be. So the first thing is, do you code? Do you write code? This might seem like a silly question. But as a developer advocate, like I said, you are the developer community's mole inside your organization. Whether that's a software foundation, whether it's a not-for-profit, whether it's you and some friends in your kitchen, or it's a big multinational company. If you are taking on the role of developer advocacy, then you are the voice of the developer. So that means that you need to understand the highs, the lows, and the mundane, everyday experience of writing and shipping code. Not only that, but you need to be able to explain and demonstrate your product at conferences and meetups. And if your product is aimed at Java developers, you probably need to be able to put a few lines of Java together that implement your product. And, you don't have to be a rock star. In fact, the fewer rock stars we have in this industry, the better. I don't want people turning up and expecting loads of things because they've got 2,000 Twitter followers. It's what we need is just, as developer advocates, is just enough of an understanding that you can have a decent conversation with developers, and you can put some code together, and it works, and you understand what people are talking about when they talk about their pain points. And if you don't code, that's not a problem. Pretty much anyone can learn enough to be able to be credible. If you take on this role and you don't code already, then maybe it'll be a bit harder at first because you'll have to do twice as much work, but that's fine. You can build yourself up into that role. And if you decide that coding isn't at all for you, or you find it, perhaps you don't have the time to put the effort in, which a lot of us don't, 'cause we're all busy people, then there's this other path that seems to be kind of forming within the developer relations world. So you've got the developer advocate on one side, and then the community manager on the other side. And community managers do that 50% of the developer relations job that has nothing to do with the technology. It's building relationships, it's understanding who's who, it's about making people feel valued, and about making the amplification of your message possible. And honestly, developer community managers are really, really valuable people to have in a team, because different people are good at different things. And so, do you code? That's a good question to have. You might be a really great coder, but if you don't have a really visceral understanding of the problem that your product solves, then you're always going to come off a little like a fake. So this word grok is really useful, and it gets misused a lot. It means to have a visceral, deep, in-your-bones understanding of something. So if you grok the problem that your tool solves, then you can go and speak to people who are facing that problem, and you can say, yes, I share your pain. Have you tried this? Maybe not quite like that. But you can say to people that you can genuinely share an understanding with people who are facing this problem, and then when you tell them about your tool, then it's a much more genuine experience. So whether you're giving a talk or you're writing a blog post or whatever, if you don't have this understanding, then everything you write will always seem a little off. You'll either use a word in a way that doesn't quite make sense, but you don't recognize that because you don't grok the problem, or you'll just come across as yet another marketing shill, basically. But it's okay. You can get there. We can all learn new things, and basically you need to spend the time speaking to your engineers, speaking to the users, speaking to anyone who has some kind of understanding of this, and then, most important of all, trying it out yourself. If you if your tool is like a testing framework, then make sure you use that testing framework in the toy project, use the competition as well, and then try it without your framework or any framework and see how far you get. And then you can speak intelligently and in an informed way about the problem that you're solving. And that brings us on to credibility. So what separates a developer advocate from a marketing person is your credibility, your authenticity. In taking on this role of basically promoting a project to the world, you need to make sure that you never lose sight of your credibility, because it takes a while to gain a reputation, but minutes to lose it is the old idea. So if you start saying things you're uncomfortable with, or your marketing team say, well, perhaps we should really be saying X, Y, and Z, and you don't feel comfortable with those things, you don't agree with them, you don't believe with them, then you need to find a way not to say them. Because as a developer advocate, you might move from project to project or company to company, and each time what you're selling is your credibility and your authenticity. So, if you have a conversation with someone and they've heard you say something that they feel is untrue, then they're going to be much less likely to believe you. Okay, so the other side of getting ready is on your project side. In the marketing world, they do something called situational analysis, and they have a framework for this called the 5 C's. The first is the company. So before you go and do a new marketing project, you would sit down and analyze these 5 things, and you would look at where your company is, what strengths your company has, what weaknesses, all that type of thing. You would then look at your competitors. You would try to understand what framework you're working in, what ecosystem you're working in, who are the threats to you, who can you take business away from, that kind of thing. You would really need to understand your customers as well. If you don't understand your customers, then you're wasting your time in marketing. So you would need to go and understand what you're trying to solve, what problems you're looking to solve. And you would need to look at your collaborators. So who are the partners you're working with? And who else is working together with you on complementary projects. So that's marketing, the 5 C's. And the climate, the other 5 C's, sorry, that was the 4 C's. So the 5 C is, the 5th C is climate. So is your product about to get made illegal? Is there going to be a financial downturn? That kind of thing. What in the broader world is going to affect your ability to execute this marketing plan? Now, in the developer advocacy world, perhaps we could consider some different things. And I feel great shame at coining a new acronym that is so cheesy, but I'm going to advocate for the COOL framework, which is that we look at the community around our project, we look at our own organization, we consider the openness of our project and organization, and we look at the legacy that we have to deal with. So one by one, community is probably the most important one. So that means we would need to look at the competition to our project, we need to look at the ecosystem within which it exists, and we need to look at community as we already understand it, the people, the open source, or even not open source, but the community of people around it. So, competition. This is important even for a project where you're not aiming to make money from it, because you're still existing within a world where other people are most likely trying to solve your problem. Even if you've made a jetpack that works off of celery sticks, there is still competition to that, such as walking or getting the bus. That even if you've created the most amazing new thing ever, there's always some other way of achieving it, probably 99% of the time. So you need to look at what the alternatives are to you. And in a lot of this preparation, basically you're making lists of things. So it's worth just noting down a list of all the competitors to your project. And pretty quickly you'll recognize that some of them fall into categories. So there might be the market leader, the incumbent, the one that everyone thinks of when they hear about your sector. So if you're making databases, there might be one database that everyone thinks of when they think of databases. So that's a good one to keep tabs on. Then there might be the upcoming challenger, the project that's new and getting lots of press and lots of attention, lots of GitHub stars. That's another one. Then there might be a specialized niche challenger, a project that serves a very small niche within your user base, and you might decide, well, they've got that covered, so I'm not going to waste time trying to speak to those people because we'll never compete for that particular use case. And then one that we've probably all seen is the shooting star. It's a project that's burning really brightly, Everyone's talking about it, but as they dive deeper into it, they come across some of the limitations of the project, and so they start burning goodwill very quickly, and maybe they're burning money very quickly as well, because they're spending all this cash, getting lots of awareness and goodwill, but maybe they're not actually bringing the money in. So those are your competitors. Within the ecosystem, so outside of the competitors, there is the ecosystem of people that you work with. So for a lot of code projects altogether, this could be upstream people, downstream, or projects kind of on a peer relationship with you. So imagine you're a Linux distribution, you're Ubuntu, say. Your upstream is Debian and the various other projects that you pull in directly. And your downstream is a derivative distro, something like Linux Mint. And then your partners or your peers would be perhaps other distros like Fedora, SUSE, things like that. And so you need to get an understanding of who and what projects are around in the ecosystem around your project, and how your developer advocacy plan will interact with them. Because, for example, if there's a really complementary project to yours, it might be that you have a lot more impact by writing a blog post with them about how to use your two tools together than you would just by writing something about your own. Or you might be able to create a reference or a sample application that uses multiple different projects, and that would get you much more traction because many more people are likely to be interested in one of those things. So, find out where your goals align with different projects, where they diverge, what the risks might be, and then be ready to include those ecosystem projects in your plan. Okay, so community as we understand it. I think broadly there are two different types of community. There's end user communities, and that there is a photo from the Couchbase Dublin meetup. There's 70 or so software developers in that room, not all visible on the photo. And they're not there to contribute code back to the Couchbase project. They just want to use Couchbase as a tool in their own work. And then that there is a photo from the Ubuntu Developer Summit. So that is very much a contributor community, people who are either submitting code or documentation or promotional work or whatever to make Ubuntu happen. And I think that there's been a lot written and said about contributor communities. I think if you're going out and you're hoping to get awareness of your tool, you want to be on the Hacker News front page, then you're really looking at building an end user community. Even though they're developers, they're still end users of your tool. There's also this kind of thing of you need to understand what community means to the people you're working with. So it's not just how you define it, but it's how your peers, your colleagues, your superiors, if it's in a work situation, your investors, what do they mean by community? If they're looking for one particular shape of community, then you need to, particularly if they're your superiors or your investors, you need to factor that into your plans. And then you need to understand what stage of life is your community at. It might be that there is no community, it's a brand new tool, there's no one out there using it. Or it might be that it's just been neglected. Or it could be that there is some group of developers out there and they come across each other accidentally sometimes, but there's no organization around that community, and there's certainly no love from your project, your organization for that. Or it might be an unengaged yet organized community, in which case people have spontaneously formed a community around your project, but your company or your foundation or whatever just hasn't engaged with them, hasn't helped them at all. And if that's the case, then you really want to be careful, because you're effectively having control of your community taken away from you by virtue of your own unengagement. And you're going to have to work really, really hard to then earn your place in that community, even though you're from the team making the stuff. The There are a lot of faded glory communities out there, so I hate to pick on one project in particular, but just to explain it, maybe the Perl community would be a good example. 15 years ago, Perl was the language for writing web applications, and now not so much. So, they had a great community, and now it's kind of whittled down into something much more niche. And then you might be lucky. You might inherit a mature and healthy community where there's great organization, there's lots of people, and there's loads of engagement. Well, that's great. You're very lucky. But you've still then got to very carefully navigate the waters and find out where you can find your place, where you can earn your right in that community. Because the first thing that I learned when I got on the internet in 1993 was lurk for a long time before you say anything stupid. And even if you're paid to be the developer advocate for an open source project, don't say anything stupid. Just shut up for a while and see what happens. Culture is a really important one. So we're not homogenous. There are all sorts of different cultures going on, even within a group of people who look the same. You might not be able to visually tell that a group of people is actually made up of 9 to 5 Java developers who, when they leave the desk, they don't think about computers again until they sit down at it the next morning. Or they could be a group of really enthusiastic Node.js developers who spend their evenings creating NPM packages and go to work in the morning and then do more JavaScript. So you visually you can't always tell, but so you need to have conversations, find out where people are, try and understand, and really pitch your community culture right. So don't make silly Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy towel jokes to a bunch of corporate big finance .NET developers, perhaps. I don't know. And it's also worth saying here that cultural diversity is something that should be important to all of us. And if you're trying to build that into your community, don't just build a community that you feel comfortable in. It's very easy for me to go along and build a community that looks like me and think that I've succeeded because 20 people are coming to my meetups and people are using my stuff. But they're all really into beer, they all like heavy metal, and they're all shorter than average. I mean, that'd be great for me, but it wouldn't be truly representative, right? So try and think about how to make the culture of your community opening and welcome. Don't have every meetup be filled with alcohol, because not everyone feels comfortable in that situation. Make sure that your speakers are from a broad range of backgrounds and experiences. Positive discrimination gets a bad rap, but if you find that your speakers and your community look exactly all like you, then maybe you're already discriminating unconsciously in favor of people who look like you, or talk like you, or whatever. So getting the culture right is important. Organization. So this is where we talk about the kind of the company or the foundation or whatever that's putting some of the money or the effort or whatever into making this thing happen. Internal advocacy is one of the most important things you can do. If you want people to value what you're doing, and by people I mean your peers within your organization and your superiors if it happens to be a company, then you really need to be very, very meticulous about reporting back your successes. So if you're new to this, I will tell you the hard bit now. Some of your biggest roadblocks and enemies to what you're doing will be in the company that you work for or the foundation you're working for or whatever it is. Because people don't understand developer advocacy. They don't understand that a marketing white paper just isn't going to wash it. They don't understand that sometimes it can take a couple of years to get people using your tool, and they might turn into a customer. But you don't turn up to a developer conference and expect to come home with 15 really hot sales leads that your sales team can then go and turn into thousands of whatever currency. So you need to be very careful about knowing how to navigate your organization and what things are important to them. And then turn those things that are important to your superiors into numbers, track the numbers and make sure they go up. Have a dashboard that you can show internally that shows your numbers going up, and then you can carry on with the important job of building developer awareness and adoption. Hopefully the numbers and that important job align. I'm not saying fake it. I'm just saying, different people respond to different messages. So the organization you work within can be your number one enemy, but plan for that. Make sure you're always telling people how much of an impact you're having. And if you are a venture capital funded startup, then actually, developer awareness and mindshare and buzz and all of that is often worth more to the investors than hard money coming in. So just bear that in mind and keep telling everyone that you work with that actually you're doing a good job, and here's why. Okay, so the second O of cool is openness. If you're an open source project, then are pull requests welcome? And I don't just mean, is it technically possible to submit a pull request? I mean, do you have someone shepherding the process? Do you have someone looking out for pull requests? Do you have someone who will quietly take someone aside and say, actually, this doesn't meet our coding guidelines. So before this really angry engineer sees it, let's just fix that and then resubmit the pull request. Are you publishing your coding standards to make it easy for people to contribute? Do you truly welcome pull requests? Because if you don't, then don't pretend you do, because all you can do is set up an expectation and then upset hopefully a lot of people, because hopefully you'll have lots of engagement, but you'll at least upset that one person who wants to fix that bug that's been irritating them for a while, and then their pull request sits there for 6 months, and they go and do something else and never engage with you again. Are features developed in the open, or are they developed kind of behind closed doors and then unleashed on the world as a complete thing? Either way is valid, depending on what your business model is or your intentions, but just be open about it. Don't pretend that you have an open process and then suddenly, here's 2.0 that you've never seen and never heard anything about. Now you've got to redo your entire way of working. Do you publish your product roadmaps? Do you make it easy to build from source? Are community submitted bugs triaged, or do they just sit there doing nothing and making people angry? Can non-employees achieve rank or status in your community? In the Ubuntu community, which I showed earlier, a photo of some of us, it was always the intention that people could achieve a rank in the Ubuntu community that enabled them to overrule people from the sponsoring company, Canonical. And that worked, at least in the early days. I'm not sure about now, but certainly it did work. And that was really surprising to a lot of people, but it made for a vibrant, really committed, really engaged community around Ubuntu. And a really important one, do you require a contributor agreement to be signed for your project, or do you require copyright assignment or something like that? If you do, just be upfront about it. It will harm your chances of getting contributions from people doing it in their spare time, but it probably won't harm contributions perhaps from a customer or something like that. But just be upfront about it and be aware about it, so that you can then know how open your project is, so that you set the expectations. Because there are developer communities around APIs that are not at all open source and never will be, and are just there to sell API time. And that's fine, but you've got to know where you are. And then legacy. I didn't put this one in at all just to make it so I could say cool. Legacy is probably the hardest one to deal with, particularly if you're in an established project. You're going to have to deal with a lot of nonsense that came before you. So you need to understand the people, the stories, the decisions that were made before you joined. I mean, if you've got a greenfield project, then even then, you need to understand the personalities. It might be that someone from your company once tweeted something really offensive, and that's never gone away. You need to know about that. It might be that two people involved in the founding of your project really hate each other now. And I don't know, there might be something you have to deal with. And a lot of it's that kind of people stuff. And it's not things that you'll find in the official documentation, it's the off-the-record conversations you have with someone once you've gained your trust, where you'll find, oh yeah, well, person X really dropped the ball in 2 years ago, and that's why we lost that customer. And then you can know to never perhaps broach that subject again. But yeah, so legacy is important in understanding the context in which you're operating. And then once you've done all this, you can then actually sit down and write a plan for developer advocacy. And that's probably another 45-minute talk. So, in closing, I would say, don't suffer alone. There is a community forming of developer advocates, developer relations people out there. There is the Community Leadership Summit that happens every year alongside OSCON in the States. There is DevRelCon, which is my conference, which is happening in London and probably San Francisco next year. There are forums, there are Twitter people. There are at least 8 people with the title Developer Advocate or Developer Evangelist here today. And many of them are speaking. So come and talk to us if you have any of these issues or anything. Follow people on Twitter. Their job is to be friendly. So, speak to them. Always track your value. Always know what it is that you're getting out of the effort you put in. If you are spending every other week in a foreign country, largely on your own, you need to know just for yourself why you're doing this and what value you're bringing. But you also need to tell your boss. And lastly, guard your credibility with your livelihood. So you are only worth your authenticity and your credibility. Don't let anyone twist you into saying something you don't feel comfortable saying. So for more, go to devrel.net. You'll find out you can sign up to a mailing list there to find out about the conferences and so on. I'm Matthew Revell on Twitter. That's devrel.net. There's developer relations news there. And I'll be here for the next day and evening. So yeah, thank you very much. Any questions?